Good evening, America, and welcome to the Monday edition of Just the News, No Noise. I'm your host, John Solomon, reporting to you, as always, from Washington, D.C. The United States Supreme Court ended its 2023-2024 summer term with a loud bang, handing Donald Trump and future and past presidents alike a major win by affirming that all presidents enjoy substantial immunity for any official acts they took while in office. The near-term effect of this landmark ruling will be likely to delay all of President Trump's remaining criminal trials and force the courts to try to determine which actions Trump took on January 6th, or in the classified records case, should be deemed official acts and therefore covered by presumptive immunity, and which ones are personal and potential covered by criminal liability. The former president seized on the ruling, saying it should end all the remaining quote-unquote witch hunts against him. Meanwhile, Just the News broke an important story this morning that shows that Hunter Biden's efforts to trade on his father's name went back far earlier than the efforts to get money in Ukraine, China, Romania, or Kazakhstan. A 2011 memo obtained by the FBI in 2016 and recently, just in the last few weeks, turned over to Congress shows Hunter Biden told his business partners that Greek businessmen should be willing to do business with them because they believed his father, the then Vice President Joe Biden, was a saint, quote unquote, for taking a policy position they supported involving the island of Cyprus. The email obtained by Just the News is one of the earliest known declarations by Hunter Biden showing he knew he was trading on his father's name. Now, for more on that story, you can go to justthenews.com, where you can read the document and others like it. Well, now's a good time, as always, to bring in my amazing co-host, Amanda Head, from Los Angeles, where there's a lot more headlines today. Amanda, what's on your radar?
Yes, good to see you, John. Yeah, we have some viewers north of the border, and we are neighborly here at Just the News, so happy Canada Day to all of them. Now, a lot to get into tonight, including Steve Bannon turning himself into a federal prison today in Danbury, Connecticut, to serve out his 4-month-long sentence for contempt of Congress. This is notable for a number of reasons. One, because other than Peter Navarro, this doesn't really happen over contempt charges. And two, the Department of Justice just declined to do the very same thing to Attorney General Merrick Garland. That seems a little hypocritical if you ask me. But anyway, Steve spoke outside the prison earlier today before turning himself in, and he said he was, quote, proud to serve his sentence.
I am proud to go to prison. If this is what it takes to stand up to tyranny, if this is what it takes to stand up to the Garland, corrupt, criminal DOJ, if this is what it takes to stand up to Nancy Pelosi, if this is what it takes to stand up to Joe Biden, I'm proud to do it. I have not only no regrets, I'm actually proud of what I did, and I felt terrible if I didn't do it. I don't mind going to prison today, particularly if Congressman Green and Matt Gaetz and Anna Paulina Luna and other lawyers in the House turn the focus on Nancy Pelosi. The J6 committee was completely illegitimate and set up.
We're going to talk a lot more about that tonight. But speaking of Attorney General Merrick Garland, the House Judiciary Committee is suing him for the audio tapes of President Biden and Special Counsel Robert Hur's interview, the ones he would not release, and got the House to vote against him or to hold him in contempt. Now, this would be a civil suit against Garland, but the House could also use the inherent contempt power against Garland, which would let the House take the Attorney General into their custody forcibly. And how about this last one? Just because this is not something that you would have seen 4 years ago. Vice President Kamala Harris was hit with a community note on Twitter for suggesting that President Trump would implement a national abortion ban if elected president, something he has repeatedly said he won't do and will let states decide the issue for themselves. The community note provided some extra context for Vice President Harris, as well as anybody reading her post. However, it seems that the note didn't stay up forever. It is gone from the tweet right now, but that didn't stop the owner of X, Elon Musk, to tweet back at her that he clearly said he would not do so in the debate, speaking of Donald Trump. And with that, John, I'm going to hand it back over to you to bring in our very first guest of the evening to talk about that landmark Supreme Court decision that came down today.
All right, joining us now to talk about that landmark ruling at the United States Supreme Court today, Harvard Law Professor Emeritus Alan Dershowitz, the author of the great book, Get Trump. Be sure to check that out. Professor Dershowitz, good to have you on today. This was a ruling for posterity, right? Presidents past, present, and future will all benefit from this.
Yeah, and in Get Trump, of course, I predicted it exactly right. I predicted the vote. I predicted the remand to the trial court. And I predicted the fact that in the end, this may mean that Trump can't be tried until after the election, although it's possible that they can try to put it on a fast track and get him tried. What it means is that there are a great many things that he's been charged with that he can't be tried for. He has immunity. But there are other things that he probably can be tried for. You know, it's interesting because during the oral argument, Justice Barrett gave Smith's lawyers an out. And he said, look, there's been a concession that by Trump's lawyers that if it's personal, it's not covered by immunity. Why don't you just redo the indictment, charge him with the things that are personal, and go forward with the trial now? And Smith's lawyers said, no, we want to try him for the whole thing. Well, they ended up not being able to try him for the whole thing. Now there's going to have to be some delays. The case is remanded back to the trial court. She's going to have to make determinations what's on which side of the ledger. She's going to try to fast track this because she obviously has shown some bias toward the prosecution and against Donald Trump. And this is in the District of Columbia,
right,
which is going to have a jury veneer, which is very biased against Trump. So there's a possibility that you could have a trial on some issues before the election.
Wow.
Alan, I know that this stipulates between official and unofficial acts. What do you think that the determining factor is for official? Is it who they're talking to, the subject matter? What defines that?
Well, you know, the clear cases on the extremes are very easy. The president decides to order the assassination of a terrorist. He can't be tried for that. On the other hand, the president pays hush money to avoid being embarrassed about a sexual affair. Sure, he can be tried for that. Where we have problems is when he's trying to, he claims, enforce the laws, but he's enforcing them in a way that the prosecution believes are helpful to him politically. Now, the court had a very important sentence. It says, in assessing the difference between personal and official, you cannot look to the president's motive. You have to look to objective acts. You can't go inside the president's head and look to his motives. That's exactly what I argued in the impeachment case, and I was criticized for it, but now the Supreme Court has vindicated me completely. You can't look at why the president did something. You can only look at what he did.
Yeah. So on that matter, I assume, would a speech at the ellipse be considered an official act since he was there in his capacity as president?
I think he can make a very strong argument that it was an official act, that he was seeking to enforce the law and seeking to have people demonstrate patriotically and peacefully, which is what he said. Certainly that argument will be made. And the trial judge is going to have to make a determination. Now, if she makes the determination against Trump, he can appeal,
yep,
or mandamus possibly. So this case may be going back to the Supreme Court at some point. I don't think they're going to take it. I think they've said what they want to say. But we'll see a lot of litigation, a lot of strategy, a lot of tactics being employed over the next months. The real question is, can they squeeze in a trial in October? I don't think that's a good thing for America to have a trial a month before the election. But that's what Jack Smith said. Smith said that he believes the American public has the right to know whether Trump is a felon or isn't a felon, and therefore there should be a trial before the election. The problem is they won't know that until the appeals are exhausted. Even if he's convicted by a D.C. jury, the possibility of a reversal on appeal is considerable. Look what the Supreme Court did just this week.
That's right.
They reversed. They said you can't have prosecutions for obstruction of justice based on the Enron statute that focused on papers and documents. So, you know, we're going to see a lot of litigation. And my best guess is they're going to try to bring the case before the election, but I don't know whether they'll succeed.
Great.
Well, and regardless of how farcical it was, a jury in New York already made him a convicted felon, so that has been satisfied already heading into this election. I wanted to ask you about the case in Georgia. John asked about Jack Smith's cases. Is there any element of this that can be applied to the conversations that were had and the case that ensued in Georgia?
Oh, without a doubt, because immunity is immunity not only from federal prosecution, but state prosecution as well. There could also be an argument about the Florida case, whether or not the president, when he took with him some classified material, was acting in a personal or a public capacity. probably that's a stretch. But the argument in Georgia is not a stretch at all. That's a strong argument.
Yeah. Alan, I want to ask about one of the justices, Amy Coney Barrett. Here in this case, though, she signed on to the majority. She suggested that this didn't need to be as long and tortured a process as it was sent back to the court. She kind of differed with the conservative majority in a couple of the final rulings of the year. Your thoughts on what she might have been trying to signal today in her own opinion?
I think a number of the justices are very concerned about the court becoming too politicized and too predictable. Jackson went along with the majority on the case involving obstruction of justice. Barrett said some things that are relevant. I think we're seeing sensitivities toward these 6-3 decisions. Look, the Supreme Court was hurt very badly in Bush versus Gore 24 years ago when it split 5-4 strictly along Republican-Democrat lines and elected a Republican president. Whether that was the right decision or the wrong decision, it was widely perceived as being political. And I think Chief Justice Roberts wants to avoid that accusation against this court, and having a couple of justices in the middle that occasionally do switch is probably a good thing from his point of view.
Yeah, good point.
How do you remedy it, though? Because, I mean, let's be real. The inception of what has become political starts with politicized prosecutors.
There's no question about that. And I think one of the messages the Supreme Court sent, particularly in the obstruction case, is don't be creative. You can't use criminal statutes to bring about results that you want to see brought about, even if you think they're just results. You have to read the statutes according to what they were intended to cover. And so I think we're seeing a message being sent to prosecutors by the Supreme Court. We're not going to countenance politicization of the criminal justice system. But, you know, the Supreme Court, because of the makeup, is inherently has an element of partisan politics in it, too. It's a matter of degree. And I think this decision is right on the merits of constitutional law. I think it would be unthinkable to have no immunity whatsoever for a president. And I think it would be equally unthinkable to grant him immunity for everything he did, even things that are not covered by the duty of the president under the Constitution. So I think the Supreme Court split the difference in an appropriate and constitutionally valid way. But the perception is that these are result-oriented decisions in which the Republicans go for the Republicans and the Democrats go for the Democrats. And that's not a good look for the Supreme Court.
Yeah, good point. Al, I want to talk to another one of your favorite topics, free speech. The court seems to have punted on a lot of the merit of whether, one, the government can pressure social media to censor, and two, whether states can litigate under state law to stop it. Can you talk a little bit about the delay that maybe these two rulings have given to resolving that issue?
It's the hardest issue that the First Amendment has confronted since I've been studying the First Amendment. The relationship between government bodies and the mega media that controls what people think and can have enormous influence on elections and on public perceptions. It's very, very hard. And I'm actually glad the Supreme Court didn't jump in with 2 feet and maybe is giving a little bit of time for these issues to simmer and maybe have a 30,000-foot view on some of these issues, because they're very, very difficult. There's no simple answer to those questions. I mean, the framers of the Constitution certainly would be turning over in their grave if they thought that private parties like X and Twitter and others could be the ones doing the censoring rather than the government. So these are hard, hard questions. What you have is these private parties invoking the First Amendment, claiming that that gives them the right to censor. So they're closing the marketplace of ideas, but they're doing it under the First Amendment. And that's very, very difficult to conceptualize.
That's a great point.
Sir, before we let you go, I want to ask you about the notion that presidents should have access to desired and wise counsel and the repercussions of what we are seeing now with Peter Navarro and now Steve Bannon. Your thoughts on it?
Well, and me, the 65 Project filed a bar complaint against me because I defended President Trump. And their bar complaint was because I had written a paragraph in an opinion in a complaint in which I said when the government delegates responsibility for an important government function like counting votes, the private company has to be as transparent as the government is. That was my sole contribution to the case, and the 65 Project filed a bar complaint against me. They haven't acted on it, but it's sent a deterrent message to lawyers: stay away from defending Donald Trump, stay away from defending Steve Bannon, stay away. I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to continue to represent who I think deserve representation. But if you have young lawyers who are having bar complaints filed against them, it can impact their careers. And the Project 65 is pure McCarthyism, and we have to put an end to that.
Alan, one thing I know, we've called on you many times and drafted you for emergency duty. Your predictions on all of these cases have been spot on. Our audience is so lucky to get your insights every day. Thanks for joining us on such a historic day. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break, but fret not. We're going to come back. We got a lot more ahead right after these commercial messages.
Welcome back, everybody. The presidential debate last week between President Biden and President Trump is still making waves, and the news cycle is filled with hot takes about Joe Biden's performance, with many in the media at first expressing shock, as well as reporting that major officials within the Democrat Party are thinking about replacing President Biden with someone else. But should they? Also, is the debate helping Trump, or was everybody pretty much already decided? With us now to discuss is one of the nation's top pollsters. He's also the host of Scott Rasmussen's show on Merritt Street and the president of RMG Research. Scott Rasmussen joins us now. Thank you so much for being here, sir.
I mean, it's great to be with you. And I got to tell you, one of the funniest things about this whole discussion about the debate is that nobody will be talking about it except for Joe Biden had a very low level of expectations to live up to, and he didn't. Not a lot of people were watching the debate, relatively speaking. Virtually no swing voters were watching it. It was like a preseason baseball game where all the insiders decided what it meant. And when Biden had his horrible performance, it really changed the dynamics.
Wow.
That's a great analogy. And, we all saw the pundits' reaction on media afterwards, but the pundits don't matter. It's the American people who matter. What's your polling showing?
We don't have any polling that I'm comfortable with sharing right now since the debate, partly because it's right after the debate, partly we're heading into a holiday weekend. My guess, and the little hints I've seen in our work and some others, is that President Biden is going to lose maybe a couple of points as a result of this debate. It's not going to be a big crash. It's not going to be a complete game changer. But before the debate, President Trump, former President Trump, was a slight favorite in the race. Now he's a bigger favorite. He really solidified his lead. Losing just a couple of points for Joe Biden is devastating, especially in those swing states, places like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. He needs to win all three of those, and any slippage puts that in peril.
Yeah, great point. You mentioned something important, Scott, and that was that the debate audience was small. I think one of the smallest in 2 decades. Was it that they're not interested in the two men? Was it that it's just too early for them to be thinking about the fall election? What do you attribute that really small audience to?
Well, first of all, a week before the debate, only 34% of voters even knew what was happening,
wow,
which is suggesting it's just too early in the season. On top of that, 81% of voters said that they already knew enough about both these guys. This isn't a case where you have two unknown candidates. In fact, most voters were probably thinking, I'd like to forget some of what I know about both of these men. Among the others who said they didn't quite know enough at this point in time, they overwhelmingly said, why would we watch a debate? And I think part of that comes from the fact that the debate seemed to be designed as entertainment for the media types, or chances to show, for the moderators to show off, as opposed to letting the candidates talk. You went back to the very first televised presidential debate. John Kennedy and Richard Nixon were given 9 minutes to answer questions and respond to their opponents. I can't imagine any candidate today speaking for 9 minutes coherent.
Yeah, good point.
I think that's right. Scott, I am still very dubious that there will be any type of replacement of Joe Biden, but these rumors continue to percolate. What polling have you done on a replacement? Who seems to be the strongest as a replacement? What is that showing you?
What we hear when we talk about a replacement, people think it's like, okay, you swap in one center fielder for another. One guy goes down, you bring somebody else in. The mechanic, the legal logistic of replacing Joe Biden are enormously complex. First of all, he's already on the ballot in a number of states. There will probably have to be lawsuits to replace him on the ballot. Secondly, there's a convention that all of the delegates have already been, or majority of the delegates have been pledged to President Biden. They have to find a way to change the rules. Now, that's happened before in 1980. Ted Kennedy tried to unbind Jimmy Carter's delegates. It didn't work. If they begin to go down that path, the next problem is, who do you select? And I can tell you, the polling and the numbers and the conversation suggest Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom are at the top of the list. But the activist base of the Democratic Party dominates that process. If this were to be thrown open all of a sudden, it would be a brutal, brutal fight among Democrats. Those who want to get rid of Kamala Harris because they think she's a weak candidate would be accused of, how can you dump on the first woman of color vice president, especially to replace her with a white male? The base of the Democratic Party would force any potential nominee further to the left politically. It would be, just the difficulty of replacing President Biden as the nominee would be staggering. In fact, in my commentary this weekend on my show, on the Scott Rasmussen Show, I said it's not at all clear that the Democrats would be better off replacing him than sticking with him, despite the obvious perils of candidate Joe Biden.
Yeah, that's a good point. The downstream ticket is less known and has its own liability, so it's interesting dynamic. I want to turn to something that was very noticeable post-debate, and that was Joe Biden saying, oh, Donald Trump's a liar, he's a liar, that's why I had such a hard time with the debate. But Biden himself has a lot of problems with truth checkers right now. Kamala Harris got called out in the last 24 hours on Twitter. A lot of the things Joe Biden said during the debate ended up getting fact-checked pretty hard. Is this an effective way for him to counterpunch?
I always chuckle when a politician starts down this path because voters are very cynical. They assume if you're a politician, you have a very loose relationship with the truth. Yeah. I mean, it's just part of the process.
Yep.
Before this debate, 41% of voters told us that Joe Biden is less ethical than most politicians. And that's a very low bar, less ethical than most politicians. 51% say the same about Donald Trump. So accusing either of these men of being a liar, to most people is like, okay, so what else is new?
You're right. Less ethical than most politicians. That is a very, very low bar. I want to ask you about
Amanda, I've got to tell you, there are 10% of voters, the ultimate swing voters, believe they are both less ethical than most politicians. And for them, a big part of the decision is whether it's even worth going out to vote.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's important.
And you and I must be on the same track, because I was thinking about these swing voters with respect to the debate, and I think you're right. I mean, this wasn't a debate to parse out policies. Everybody knows what the policies look like on both sides. But do you think that there is any segment of society that at least the cognitive abilities in Joe Biden's maneuvering and appearance on stage affected them?
I would think it's going to have a bigger impact long run on the enthusiasm of the Democratic base, sort of be a turnout factor. I don't think there's a lot of people who say, I was going to vote for Joe Biden, so now I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. I think there may be a number of people who say, I just can't do this. I would expect that among younger voters, it will hurt turnout, which is a net loss for the Democrat. And I also think this is a possibility. November's a long way away, so things can happen between now and then. But if nothing fundamental changes between now and Election Day, we may see a situation like 1980 when Carter had to overcome that fight within his own party to keep the nomination. And at the end of the day, John Anderson, a third-party candidate, took 7% of the vote nationwide, and that helped Ronald Reagan not just win, but win a pretty convincing victory over Carter. It may be that if nothing changes, a lot of people who will say, I just can't vote for Joe Biden. I'm not going to vote for Trump. I'm going to stay home, or I'm going to vote for RFK. And oh, by the way, I'm going to vote for a Democrat in the U.S. Senate and House to provide a little check on our new president.
Yeah. Scott, one of the fun things you're doing right now is measuring the gap between the elitists who are at the top of law firms and big media and big tech and politics and government and everyday people. That seems to be growing and growing, the gap between everyday people and what the elitists think. What's your latest insights as we head into the fall election? Is that gap getting to be a problem for a certain part of society?
Absolutely. What it suggests, first off, is that the elites don't understand the country they want to rule over, even on something as simple as who's going to watch the debate. You know, everybody in the elite bubble was excited about the debate coming, and most Americans were saying, what are you talking about? It's baseball season. We start talking about particular issues, and the gap has enormous implications. I'll just cite two. One of them is a majority of people in this elite world, the elite 1%, believe that the federal government should have the power to censor social media posts. Only 16% of voters agree.
Wow.
So you have this group that is going to try and implement policies and actions that they think, are right and natural, and they're running right into a tremendous amount of opposition that they don't see coming. Another example is on gun law. Most people in this elite world favor banning private ownership of handguns. They don't understand that most Americans fundamentally reject that. So the elite bubble creates problems for people, especially right now, say in President Biden's orbit, because they're misunderstanding how the American people are reacting.
Amazing.
Absolutely. Such a huge separation, and your polling highlights that. Scott, you are tremendous. Thank you.
Welcome back, America. Such momentous news today in the courts. It'd be fun to see how that news is playing out in Congress. Joining us right now, Congressman Ralph Norman from the great state of South Carolina. Congressman, good to have you on.
Hey, glad to be with you, John and Amanda.
This is a pretty big day. I think the Supreme Court ruled on something that will have decades or centuries of impact. Your initial take on what the Supreme Court did in declaring absolute immunity for official acts that presidents enjoyed?
Well, it just shows that the Supreme Court cannot be weaponized as what Biden has done so many other agencies in his administration. And it's the right ruling. It's surprised. Well, it really did surprise. It was a 6-3 split, but it was the right ruling. And it's something Democrats did not want to hear. And they've been intent on trying to find something to get Donald Trump on. And this just, I guess, solidifies the great ruling that the court made. And, it's so great in a lot of different ways. They can't use it, the immunity. They can't use the things that he does in his official capacity for other trials. And I think the lower court will decide on the depth of it. But I'm excited. It's the right ruling at the right time. And it could not have come at a better time, actually.
Congressman, I want to ask you about the decision, one of the decisions that came down on Friday, Loper, regarding Chevron deference. Is there a tangible change for members of Congress like yourself for authoring bills in specificity because you no longer have these three-letter agencies that are effectively take on the job that you guys do?
Yeah, what you had, Amanda, was unelected bureaucrats writing basically language for laws, and to now have the court throw that out and not take that carte blanche is a huge victory. And I know we had several phone calls during the day and meetings, and what a great case to be decided. People have been waiting on this, and not just in government, outside of government as well. This goes a long way to, again, taking the weaponization away from the Biden administration. And these agencies who were the law of the land, basically, and were gumming up processes, now don't have that opportunity to do that. And again, that could not have come at a better time.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, a little recalcitrant, still not turning over the Robert Hur tapes today. Congress went to court and sued him to try to compel him to do so using the federal court system. This seems to take on a little bit more importance. What's on those Robert Hur tapes? What state of mind Joe Biden have after people being so spooked by the Thursday night debate, seeing a president who looked completely disheveled and in many ways out of touch?
Well, not only out of touch, I mean, it's just blatant disregard for the law, John.
Yeah.
I mean, he ignored 2 subpoenas.
Good point.
And he's supposed to set the gold standard for law enforcement and for doing. You abide by the subpoenas and you show up. If that wasn't the case, look at what's happening to so many of Donald Trump's people that they're going to jail. Steve Bannon and others, and the fact that he can't get by with that. The other thing, the great part about, I guess, not having him on the Supreme Court, you're seeing really his disregard for the law. And just think, he came close, or he thought he was close to being put on the Supreme Court years ago, and it didn't happen. But I think Anna Luna I think this will pass in the House. The Speaker's behind it. We thought we were going to vote on it last Friday, but I think some changes were made, and it's going to be going to be a great day. And I think I know our party will probably have to pass it without the Democrats, but I think we got the votes to do that.
Are you saying inherent contempt might be passed in the House?
I think it will. I really do. And I think
that'd be a big moment.
It'd be a big moment, and for him to be arrested by the Sergeant of Arms, they've done that to hundreds of other Americans. Look at what they're facing. So I'm glad it's coming. I'm glad it's gotten as far as she has worked on this for, I think, over 2 years.
Wow.
To get this right, to make sure she has it in a form that one will pass the House and one that gets the job done with Merrick Garland.
Great.
Sir, you may have been also talking about the January 6th committee, but I wanted to just clarify on that. What is the status of effectively the nullification of that committee?
Well, they can't prosecute the January 6th people that have been sitting in jail without a trial, without a lawyer for years now. And I think, again, that sets the bar pretty high, as it should be. The federal government has overreached in so many different areas. And these people have a right to have an attorney, have a trial, as every American should have per the Constitution. So I think the fact that that's going to will play into that is news to not only the people that are sitting in jail, but they're arresting people now all over the country, and some of them are further along than what we've seen that are sitting in jail. But it's a travesty for the judicial system, and it's a travesty that they're weaponizing.
Yeah. Sir, I want to ask a little bit about censorship. The Supreme Court on the 2 main censorship cases kind of kicked the ball down the road last week, saying the defendants in Missouri, Murtha, didn't have standing for a temporary injunction. This week, sending the Florida and Texas laws back for more consideration by the lower courts. Is Congress in a position, or does Congress have an appetite maybe to impose some form of protections against government censorship that we've seen in the big tech world particularly?
I think they do. The devil's in the details, and what we can actually get past. Suddenly, there's a lot of people talk about the unfairness of censorship, banning certain politicians for basically no reason, but there's an undercurrent that has been reluctant to do that. I think if we put it in a good form, and I think if we frame it where the majority of Americans, it's going to have to come from the American people to force the politicians to do this. But big tech has had a free ride for a long time. We ought to be able to sue them as we should have been able to do years ago, and hopefully that law will change as well.
Good point. Section 220.
Congressman, you are up on Capitol Hill with a lot of people with B's next to their name. We all witnessed the orchestra of panic that ensued on social media and on liberal media after the debate. But what are you hearing from your Democrat colleagues behind closed doors?
Amanda, if you listen to the mainstream media after the debate, they were all on the same, had the same talking points. And what was apparent to me, this is not new news. They've known this. The American people have seen this for really the last 17 months. He couldn't find his way off a stage. He didn't know whose hand to shake. He, couldn't read from a teleprompter. So we've known this. I think this is a blatant attempt to set the stage for trying to get somebody else to replace him. And the fact that Joe Biden, the convention is coming up, he's been through the primaries. He's their candidate. Now, the fact that he had a poor debate, what did you expect? I didn't expect anything different. He's progressively gotten worse, maybe, but he's been bad for a long period of time. And this isn't the first time that he stumbled and, said things that just didn't make sense. He didn't know the name of his own agencies or the heads of them. And he's had that wrong for a long time.
Yeah, people he meets with, the cabinet, I know, really remarkable. Congressman, as always, we love having you on. We get a lot of straight talk. We'll be watching that inherent contempt move through the Congress. That could be a big moment. Good to have you on, sir.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, a little bit more of the Supreme Court with Cornell Law Professor William Jacobson right after these messages. Hey, this July, as we celebrate the birth of our nation, it's important to reflect on the freedoms our forefathers fought for. But today, these freedoms are under attack. Look no further than the treatment of President Donald Trump. If the left can go after him with such ferocity, think they can and will come after us. That's why now, more than ever, we need to stick together and fight back. AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens, is more than just a senior discount organization. AMAC is dedicated to protecting our conservative values and defending our rights. Learn more about how AMAC is actively fighting for our freedom by visiting amac.us/no noise. By joining AMAC, you're not just becoming a member, you're becoming part of a movement. This July 4th, let's pledge to stand united. Join AMAC today and ensure that our voices are heard. amac.us/no noise. Together, we're going to make a difference.
Welcome back, everybody. It is time now to get back to the biggest story of the day, the Supreme Court's immunity decision, which seems to be a big win for President Trump and other presidents alike, and Biden's supporters in the media. They aren't happy about it. Take this argument from Adam Kinzinger, for example.
It's all about power with these folks. It's not about this understanding of what the rule of law is and what is ultimately going to happen if you determine a president can be immune. I mean, honestly, and he'd never do it because he's a decent man, but if Joe Biden decided to use SEAL Team 6 to go after his political rivals, according to this case, he may be justified in doing that.
So could the president use SEAL Team 6 to kill off his opponent, as Adam Kinzinger is suggesting? Well, joining us now to talk about that and more is Cornell University law professor and founder of Equal Protection Project, William Jacobson. Professor, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
You know, I don't know what Adam Kinzinger's level of education is with respect to the law, but I'm interested in what you think about his take.
Well, his take was based on the dissent by Sonia Sotomayor. It was not based on the majority opinion. And I think that's something that might have even come up during oral argument in this case, is what is the outer boundary? And we don't really know what the outer boundary is, but if, being president and taking out a political rival is considered an official act, it might have some immunity, but I think it's unlikely a court would find that that is an official act, that would be purely personal, would not have immunity. But this is the sort of fear-mongering. And remember how we got here. We got here because the government pushed rather novel and aggressive theories of liability against a former president, forcing the Supreme Court to tell us whether there is some form of immunity. So they pushed this, the court pushed back, defending this of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and frankly, Barack Obama and any other living president to be the president. That's all this says, is that you can't criminalize being the president.
Yeah, really remarkable. This has a lot of important downstream effects, but short term, the biggest effect may just be in the pace at which Donald Trump's cases can go forward. Obviously, this was in the January 6th case, but I guess it could also potentially apply to the classified documents case because he was president when he decided to gather up those documents. Do both of those cases slow down a little bit?
Well, certainly the D.C. case slows down because pieces of it have been thrown out. So communications with the Department of Justice, which is part of that case, are deemed by the Supreme Court to be absolutely immune. Communications with Mike Pence regarding the counting of the electoral votes has presumptive immunity. Big pieces of that case are gone. The court left open other pieces. So the lower court's going to have to decide whether the actions Donald Trump took in giving a speech at a rally, in giving tweeting, in communicating with people at the state level, whether those are in fact within the scope of an official act. And that's something to be determined. Even if some of that goes forward, such big pieces of the case have been taken out that the lower court's going to have to go through a process of resolving what is left. And then, of course, there'll be an appeal process. So the likelihood of this getting done in a trial before the election, I think, is remote.
Yeah, good point.
Professor, I just want to step back and ask a bit of a legal/cultural question, because we've spoken to a number of lawyers on this show who have expressed concern over the posterity of the legal profession and the health of the legal profession going forward, and the opprobrium that can plague a young lawyer's career. As you are molding young legal minds and sending them out into the workforce, what type of advice do you give them to avoid being on the receiving end of like a frivolous and political bar complaint?
Well, that's a major problem. There is a concerted effort to keep conservative lawyers from contesting election cases. There are going to be bar complaints against you. There may be prosecutions against you. There are things that have been the norm until now, which is novel, not frivolous, but novel legal arguments meant to advance a client's cause have been routine. I mean, that's what the legal profession was supposed to do. Representing unpopular clients used to be a badge of honor. Think about all the, unpopular clients who've been represented over the years. But the Democrats have an organized effort to try to scare away conservative lawyers. And talking to a younger lawyer, I would have to be honest with them that this is a real risk to your career. It may not be fair, it may not be good for our society, but it is a real risk, and that the Democrats have really upped the ante for anyone who wants to be a lawyer against Democrats.
Important. I've heard that so many lawyers in this town really worried about it. And I hear from a lawyer a week who's getting kicked out of his law firm just for representing a Trump person. It's remarkable. One more I want to turn to the Chevron decision, reversing the Chevron doctrine, taking away some of the ability of federal bureaucrats to make law. How important was that ruling? Is that one of the most consequential of this session?
Well, it's important. I don't want to be overly dramatic. A lot of people are acting like the sky is falling. The administrative state has been ended, as if that would be a bad thing. So no, it's important, but it's not a doctrine that's been heavily relied on in the past decade. The Supreme Court has moved away from it anyway. And all it really does, people are acting like it's the end of the world. All it really does is it says that the judiciary will reach its own independent determination in interpreting ambiguous provisions of a law. Why is that controversial? The question is, why have we lived under a regime since 1984 where a federal judge was required to defer to some nameless, faceless bureaucrat as to what the law meant?
That's a great point.
It makes no sense for people to panic the way they are.
Yeah, great point.
I think that's a really, really great take on this. Professor William Jacobson, thank you so much for being here. We always love having you here. All right, everybody, we've got one more segment and a few more news stories to hit before we head out for the night, so stay with us and we'll be right back.
Hey, America, it's 2024, and you know what? You got to start taking care of your liver now more than ever. Why? Because the latest data from the American Heart Association indicates that adults with fatty liver were 3.5 times more likely to have heart failure than those without. The American Liver Foundation says that 100 million of us Americans have fatty liver, which means many people are at risk. We throw everything at our livers, right? Cholesterol, alcohol, toxins, Tylenol, statins, cigarettes, you got it. That's why so many of us have a sluggish, fatty liver that makes us gain weight and lose energy. For decades now, your liver's helped you with over 500 key functions every day. It's time for you to return to favor. Help your liver. There's a solution. Liver Health Formula, an all-natural supplement which contains 11 clinically proven botanicals that help recharge and protect your liver. You can try Liver Health Formula and receive a free bottle of nano-powered omega-3 to go along with it. That'll keep your heart healthy. Try Liver Health Formula by going to getliverhelp.com/justnews. That's getliverhelp.com/justnews and claim your free bonus.
Welcome back, everybody, to this last segment. John, hot dog. I thought this week was going to be a little bit slower when it came to news, but we knew on Friday, not getting the presidential immunity decision, that was not going to transpire at all. And boy, this week started with a bang. Your top take.
Well, listen, it was a legal fireworks day. This is such an important case. And it's not just important for Donald Trump. It's important for the future of how this country is going to deal with lawfare and legal weaponization against future presidents. And so the court today, I think, laid down a pretty sweeping bar that says anything that looks like an official action starts with presumptive immunity. I think that was a very important moment. I enjoyed all the reaction. I thought Professor Dershowitz today suggesting that maybe they still can squeeze in a trial before November was interesting. He must know something. But I thought the most newsy thing that occurred when we were going through all these interviews today, Amanda, Ralph Norman saying he thinks there's enough votes in the House to do an inherent contempt and have Merrick Garland arrested by the House Sergeant at Arms. That caught me off guard. He sits on the Rules Committee, pretty powerful committee. They know what's going on. Did that tickle your ear a little bit?
It sure did. And like you said, being on the Rules Committee, he's got to count those votes. He's got to know exactly where they stand on this. It doesn't surprise me at all that this would be along party lines. But, oh my goodness, what does that look like, John? You've been doing this a little bit longer than I have, but I never thought that I would ever see something like this. I mean, literally, does that look like the House Sergeant at Arms going, I don't think that there would be handcuffs involved, but what would ensue?
I don't know. We're going to try to get Anna Paula Luna on here because I think I'd love to learn what she's thinking. She's driving this train, and slowly this went from being, a fringe idea to actually starting to catch attention. And I think I heard Congressman Norman say that the speaker's on board with it now. So it's a very interesting moment in the debate. But we don't know. I mean, it's been a long time since it was used. I guess 1800s was the last time it was used.
Incredible.
Yeah, it is. It is pretty remarkable. I want to ask a little bit about Iran. I think everyone is waking up to the reality that Joe Biden unleashed the beast, and whether it's the Houthis attacking our ships in the waters, or all of the violence from Hezbollah, Hamas, and elsewhere, it seems as though people who used to not speak up about Iran are speaking up. Obama's former national security advisor basically saying Joe Biden's not tough enough on Iran. That's a big one.
Yeah. And when you consider, I don't want to say the silence of the past from some of these people, but, it was complicated relationships, right? And especially considering Obama's relationship with Joe Biden, I think that it is a sign that they are starting to agree with publicly. I think they've agreed with it all along. The opinions that Joe Biden's administration, especially on foreign policy and geopolitics, has just expressed weakness on the foreign stage. And Iran and Russia and China and North Korea, these countries are seizing on an opportunity where there is a vacuum of power. And here you go.
Yeah, no doubt. One last thing.
I want to make sure I get to this before a headline over on justthenews.com. 3 out of 4 EV panel developers. Oh my goodness, they can't get the electricity. But I thought that this was green energy and everything was in place. All of the dots were connected and we were good to go on electric energy or on EVs.
The green energy story is putting the cart so far in front of the horse crashes into it. And I think over and over in the last couple of months, we've seen these things. There was another one, another account at 225 different actions trying to restrain gas, even though everybody in the energy says, we're not going to do without gas for the next 50 years. Don't even try. Joe Biden's green energy has a lot of people seething red right now. And I think that was a very powerful story.
Yeah. And, he's got record high disapproval numbers, but for the people who are on the approval side, whether you're talking about green energy, the border, the economy, what is there to approve of, even if you're whatever. Anyway, all right, that's all we have for you tonight, but we're going to be back tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern. Grant Stinchfield is going to take you through the next hour. Have a blessed night.